At the same time, in the forest, someone lit a bonfire. Lin Tian went to the goblin camp. He was holding a spear. The other goblins were left speechless when they saw what he was doing. They did not know what that strange thing he had in his hands was. Using the spear, without much effort, Lin Tian thrust it into the wolf's head, killing it instantly. Upon seeing how easily he had killed the wolf, the goblins were surprised. Even the goblin chief who was holding a staff was in shock. Lin Tian pulled the spear out of the wolf's head, extended his hand towards the goblins, and with a smile explained to them that this spear was a weapon he had made with iron ore. One of the goblins started to point at the wolf's corpse and explained to them that he was not lying, and that indeed he had killed the wolf with the spear, saving them from the attack. They also wanted a spear since it was much more powerful than the stone spear. While the goblins were talking among themselves, Lin Tian grabbed the spear tightly, raised it in the sky, and caught everyone's attention. While with one hand he was holding the spear, he extended the other to one side, and with a calm look asked them if they also wanted a spear like this. All the goblins approached him, started looking at the spear with a surprised look and responded to him with a yes. The goblins started to look at Lin Tian's spear as if it were a weapon of the gods, while the goblin chief, who was behind them, tightly gripped his staff, lowered his head, began to look at the ground and decided to do something about it. He struck the tip of the staff on the ground forcefully, drawing everyone's attention. He began to stare intently at Lin Tian and with a smile told everyone that he didn't know if Lin Tian was lying. He approached them and asked him if he could really make iron spears. Lin Tian and the other goblins started to look at the chief goblin and remained listening in silence. He began to stare at Lin Tian and with a smug smile, told him that if he wanted to stay in the camp then within 2 days he had to make more than 50 iron spears. After saying this, the chief turned his back to him, and while he was walking away, he clenched his teeth tightly and thought that this guy was a threat. One of the goblins started looking at the chief with a confused look and asked him why he had become as bad as humans. Lin Tian simply remained silent. Another goblin who was nearby decided to help him make the spears. He started to stare at the chief and couldn't help but start smiling, as everything was going according to his plan. 2 days later, the day of the spear delivery arrived, but to everyone's surprise, he threw a basket full of spears with iron tips on the ground. All the goblins nearby started dancing with joy and Lin Tian informed the chief that he had brought what he had requested. The chief goblin started to smile like a madman, and with a smug look, he congratulated him for having managed to make so many spears in 2 days. Several minutes later, all the goblins in the camp got hold of a spear. Now everyone had one. They lit a fire. The chief raised the staff into the sky and decided to celebrate Lin Tian's incorporation into their group by allowing everyone to eat meat at their pleasure. Lin Tian, who was next to him, crossed his arms and remained silent while all the other goblins began dancing with joy. They put more wood on the fire, making the flames more intense. Not far away, there was a leaf on the ground and on top of the leaf was roasted pork. The little goblin took a piece of meat from the roasted pork, approached Lin Tian, started looking into his eyes and explained that this was especially for him. Lin Tian, who was sitting on the ground with one hand resting on the ground and the other on his knee, began to look at her and remained thinking in silence. Without much hesitation, he grabbed the piece of meat, brought it to his mouth, and took a bite since he was very hungry. But as soon as he swallowed it, his expression changed drastically. The veins on his face became more visible. He clenched his teeth tightly and thought that this was not good. The reality was that the roasted pig was poisoned. He fell to the ground, placed both hands on it, opened his mouth and began to scream in pain. The little goblin who was next to him approached him and upon seeing this, she panicked and asked if he was okay. She grabbed Lin Tian's arm to help him stand up, but at that moment someone appeared in front of them. Seeing who this person was left her in shock. She couldn't help but panic and start sweating. He was none other than the chief goblin. While he was holding the staff with one hand, he extended the other to one side, started laughing and mocked Lin Tian by calling him a fool. He had thought that he was very smart. He told him not to think that he couldn't see his ambitions. He had dared to challenge the authority of the chief and as punishment, he would receive death. He began to move his hand, which had sharp claws, closer to the head of the small goblin. He grabbed her by the hair and started moving his other hand towards her chest, causing her to close her eyes tightly, clench her teeth hard and start crying due to the pain. He began to stare intently at Lin Tian and with a smile asked him if he cared a lot about this little goblin. Using his sharp nails, he ran his hand across her neck, causing her to start bleeding. He mocked Lin Tian by telling him to enjoy watching how he was going to decapitate the traitor. According to him, Lin Tian would no longer be able to boast so much in front of him. The chief goblin attacked the little goblin, causing blood to start flying everywhere. But at that moment, the chief's hand went flying. Just before he could attack, Lin Tian recovered from the poison, stood up and using the dagger cut off the chief's hand. The hand fell to the ground near the campfire, and the little goblin also fell to the ground. She was unable to understand what had just happened. The goblin chief grabbed his wounded hand with his other hand, started looking at Lin Tian with a furious look, clenched his teeth tightly and asked him how he dared to do this. Lin Tian, who was holding the dagger, began to smile and explained that the only fool here was him. He called the chief an old bastard. He already knew from the system that this guy was going to try to poison him. He had just been acting so that he would lower his guard. The goblin chief let his arms drop to his sides, started looking at the ground, and remained silent in thought. Around his neck, he wore a necklace made of branches and bones. Without giving it much thought, he grabbed the necklace firmly and broke it. The necklace transformed into a mace. He grabbed the necklace, started running towards Lin Tian and prepared to attack. Seeing this, Lin Tian put the dagger close to his face, started staring at the chief and adopted a defensive stance. Using all his strength, he attacked Lin Tian. But to his surprise, Lin Tian reacted in time and moved aside, dodging the attack and causing the chief to fall to the ground. He was not going to waste this opportunity. He approached the chief from behind, grabbed the dagger with both hands and with a murderous look, prepared to finish him off. The chief, who was lying on the ground, turned his head back and upon realizing that Lin Tian was ready to attack, he thought this wasn't good. He tried to do something about it, but his efforts were in vain. Just before he could make a move, Lin Tian firmly grasped the dagger and using all his strength gave a strong blow to his neck, cutting it. The head of the chief separated from the body and fell to the ground. His eyes turned white and he lost his life. Lin Tian turned his back on him, and several seconds later, the headless body of the chief fell to the ground. Upon witnessing this, the goblins nearby were shocked. They did not know why he was so strong. Lin Tian began to walk towards them and due to fear, a goblin fell to the ground and started crawling backward. He couldn't help but start feeling very afraid and think that now that the chief was dead, they were also going to die. Several goblins were hiding, some behind the camping tents and others behind barrels. Lin Tian gave a shout and caught everyone's attention. From today he proclaimed himself as the boss of the camp. Upon hearing this, the goblins who were hiding began to come out. They started approaching him and began to prostrate themselves before him as a form of respect. While with one hand he was holding the dagger, he extended the other to the side and with a serious look told everyone that as the new boss, he was going to lead them all to attack the elves and humans. He approached the small goblin, placed a hand on her shoulder, raised the dagger to the sky and with a shout told everyone that from now on there would be endless meat forever. Upon hearing this, the goblins stood up and began to go crazy with joy. They raised their hands to the sky and couldn't help but start dancing and saying that Lin Tian was the best boss. The corpse of the chief fell to the ground. Lin Tian placed a hand on the small goblin's hip, turned his head towards the corpse and gave them permission to devour the chief. At first all the goblins remained silent, but then without thinking twice, they started running towards the chief's corpse. The goblins began to devour the chief, and Lin Tian and the small goblin simply stood watching this scene in silence. He began to stare at the goblins and started to smile since conquering the goblin tribe was just the beginning of revenge. Next he was going to make the elves raise a stronger generation for his tribe. While the goblins were enjoying their meal, someone who was hiding in some bushes appeared behind them. This was a blonde-haired elf. She was sitting on the ground and spying on the goblins. She began to stare at Lin Tian and upon seeing this scene, she couldn't help but start wondering what was happening. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.